As you know, I've been working on a harness for making CLI utilities. And I specifically want to focus on making utilities that's AI driven rather than a chat where I can just ask random stuff and you give it access to a bunch of tools and you hope for good outcomes. I want to constrain it and I want it to be like a utility that has a start and an end. But sometimes you do have follow-ups, and so I've added the ability to, at the end of the main work, open a chat where you can ask the questions. I'm going to show a little bit of that today. I also want to show how I use LLMs to do my DMARC report, DMARC reporting. DMARC is an email system where senders who send you mail or who you send mail actually will report on the compliance of your system and whether people are spoofing you, etc. There are of course many online services that do DMARC reporting. I've tried many of them. I've tried self-hosted ones, and for me, I found they all suck. They all fail to parse half my reports, especially the Microsoft ones. Probably because those reports aren't standards compliant, but what can you do? You can't exactly file a report to fix them. And so what I found by writing my own parser, I can just say, here's a file that doesn't parse correctly, find the issues, fix the parser. And so I have a non-standards compliant parser, but it parses every report I get. And then it parses it into like a giant J file. Let's see, JSON file, way too much here to pass this into an LLM. It's like 64 kilobytes. And so then I had a skill that Claude wrote a skill even, where it was doing a bunch of JQs over it. So here we can see it gets the headline numbers or the day grouping from my big report, and so it made a bunch of querying tools that queries this JSON file. That's what you see here. I've also added a small dig utility and a memory. And what it does is it basically reads last month's or the most recent snapshot of what it's seen, past attacks, past spoofing, etc. And to look at the new data and then draw conclusions if everything is still okay or if there's significant changes that needs to be done. And then it updates its memory so that the next time you talk it will talk again based on the previous conversation. And so, I really like that, and I really like that in Claude you could talk to it. But it was, too clever. And so now I have a constrained set of tools that it can actually interact with. And that's all it does. There's no bash prompt here. I know that I get deterministic parsing of these reports month after month because it just has these tools. It cannot run JQ, for instance. And so I'm just going to show that. ABT. So I tell it start off and review the file. This is a new app builder feature where it will load secrets from 1Password. So that's obviously my Anthropic key. And I've also made a new UI for Fisk. And here we can see it's starting, it's reading its report, it's loading up files, it's parsing this big JSON file into the smaller components, and it's now going to take this new information that we got from the tools, compare it against last month's data or the last time I spoke over data. In this case it's last month, and it's going to figure out what's new in my life essentially. And so we can go, here's a report. We can see I have some increased new messages, where they're coming from, counts per day, and now it's talking about a recurring spoof vector. And it knows about the recurring spoof vector because in last month's memory it wrote that, and it said I'm getting spoof attempts from this IP address. It also mentions here something called DKIM selector rotation, and typically this is not the kind of detail I would get highlighted in these kind of tools, and I wouldn't necessarily know about this. This is the kind of details that large mail platforms would use, not individuals with their own email. And so I would have maybe seen this or had it come across and say, what does this even mean? I would have no way of knowing. Anyway, so now it's making some recommendations. It's saying it sees that I'm being spoofed. It sees that my rules are too forgiving, and I need to fix that. Now, about this DKIM selector stuff, I do not know what means explain this concept. And this is really nice that as I am reading these reports, things are coming up that I'm trying to understand. I can just ask it, and it can go and explain it to me. And I'm using Heiko. It's not even using a very complex or strong model here, but it really is good at just explaining the stuff to me and what it works, what it means, and then grounding that explanation in my reports so I can make informed decisions about what it is telling me. I have given it a dig tool, and so I can say, can you verify the DMARC configuration of, I don't know, google.com. And it will now do a dig, you see, and it's going to figure it out. And so I can show the output from a dig command, or fold it back, and here we can see it's explaining what it sees. It says how it works, all this kind of stuff, why it's appropriate, etc., and draws a comparison between the Google one and mine, so I can understand what changes I have to make. And so this is a really nice way to do my DMARC reports, I find, because I don't deal with this stuff every single day. This is not something I do all the time. And so very often I see stuff coming up in my reports, or notes about some spoof, or some kind of conclusion it's making, or some kind of problem it wants to highlight, and I can just ask it. And so now I have a purpose-built DMARC LLM here. And I built that DMARC LLM using Fisk and just a few JSON files, YAML files rather. And I was able to solve this problem for me. Now I have made this UI for the thing, and I'm really liking it, experimenting with this GUI and how I can make such an application really easily and make the LLM. And I'll just show you maybe here is the agent definition using Haiku, no thinking, it doesn't do thinking. And here's the system prompt, which is essentially a one file skill for how I wish to interpret and approach my DMARC reporting. The tools that this thing is using, if I go down to tools, here it is. Here is a dig tool. I give it the type, I give it the enum of valid things, Here I say it's a string, the domain, and I make sure it's self-safe, so nothing can convince this tool to do shell injection via my tools, because App Builder will do the validation, making sure there's no semicolons or anything like this, and I'm just calling dig. And so you can see that by just writing this YAML file, I have the tools, I have the grounding, I have the constraints around what's happening. And I can even now do things like existing file, and it will only accept a file coming in for the input here. There's never going to be any kind of spoofing or trying to use non-existing files or shell escapes, etc. Anyway, so just a short little thing covering how I use LLMs to solve a difficult DMARC problem I have, how I used my Fisk harness to turn that into a very focused utility that only deals with DMARC and cannot do anything else on my system, and how easy it is to make that using the harness. I showed a new UI for the harness and a little bit of App Builder's new features. Thank you.